The day I agreed to help Sarah Doyle move her mother's furniture out of a storage unit, I had no idea I was walking into a plan that had already been drawn up before I ever said yes. My name is Nathan Cole. I'm 32, I work logistics for a mid-sized shipping company outside Richmond, and up until that Saturday morning, my relationship with Sarah had been exactly what it looked like from the outside. Coworkers. Cubicles 2 rows apart. Coffee runs. The kind of easy, low-stakes friendship where you know somebody's coffee order and their kid's name and absolutely nothing else about their actual life. Sarah was sharp, funny in a dry way that snuck up on you, and about as private as a person could be while still being pleasant to everyone in the building. She never talked about family. Never posted anything personal. When people asked how her weekend was, she gave you 3 words and moved the conversation somewhere safer. I respected that. I didn't push. So when she stopped by my desk on a Thursday afternoon looking like she hadn't slept right in a week, I noticed before she said a single word. "Can I ask you something weird?" She said. "Depends how weird." She glanced around the office like she wanted to make sure nobody was listening, which told me more than the question did. My mom's storage unit got flagged for a lien. I have until Saturday to clear it out or they auction everything inside, including my dad's old workbench and about half her furniture from the house she just sold. I don't have a truck. I don't really have anyone else to ask. I had a truck. That was the whole reason she was standing there, and we both knew it, but neither of us said it out loud because that would have made it feel like a bigger favor than it was supposed to be. Here's the thing about Sarah Doyle that I should probably explain before I go any further. In 6 months of sitting 2 cubicles away from her, I had learned exactly 4 personal facts. She had a dog named Biscuit. She hated the office coffee enough to bring her own from home every single day without fail. She'd gone to state on a partial scholarship. And she did not, under any circumstances, talk about her family. I used to think that last one was just personality. Some people are private. I respected it and never pushed, because pushing felt like the kind of thing that would cost me the easy, comfortable friendship we already had. So when she stood at my desk looking like she hadn't slept, already halfway to asking for something she clearly hated needing, I understood 2 things at once. First, that whatever was happening at that storage unit mattered enough to break 6 months of careful silence. Second, that I was about to find out more about Sarah Doyle in one Saturday than I had in half a year of coffee runs combined. "I can do Saturday," I said. Something in her shoulders came down half an inch. "You don't have to." "I know. I'm still doing it." That was supposed to be the entire story. A truck, a storage unit, a few hours of lifting, maybe a thank you lunch afterward. I did not expect to meet her mother. I definitely did not expect her mother to already know my name before I introduced myself. The storage facility sat off a 2-lane road outside town, rows of orange doors baking in the morning sun. Sarah was already there when I pulled in, arms crossed, standing beside a woman I assumed had to be her mother because there was no mistaking the resemblance. Same sharp eyes. Same way of standing like she was quietly assessing the whole situation before deciding what to say about it. "Nathan," the woman said, before Sarah had gotten 2 words out. "I'm Carol. Sarah's told me a lot about you." I looked at Sarah. Sarah looked like she wanted the storage unit door to fall on her. "She really hasn't," Sarah said. "I've mentioned you exist. That's different from a lot." Carol smiled the kind of smile that told me she had already decided the difference didn't matter. She was maybe 55, silver threading through dark hair pulled back loose, dressed like she'd come ready to work rather than supervise, which I appreciated more than I expected to. Some people show up to help and mean stand around holding a clipboard. Carol grabbed a box before I'd even gotten the truck gate down. "You didn't have to come out for this," I told her, mostly because it felt like the polite thing to say. "It's my furniture," Carol said. "I wasn't going to sit at home while strangers decided what happens to my husband's workbench." That corrected me fast. Not a stranger. A neighbor's kid, maybe, in her mind. Somebody's son. I filed that away and didn't think much more of it, because at that point I still believed the whole morning was about boxes and a rented truck bed, nothing else. It took us almost 4 hours. The unit was packed tighter than I expected, furniture stacked against furniture, boxes labeled in handwriting that looked careful and old-fashioned, the kind of labeling someone does when they're trying to hold on to order in the middle of losing something bigger. Sarah didn't say much while we worked. Every so often I'd catch her standing still in front of a box, reading a label, then moving on like she hadn't stopped at all. At one point I found her holding a small metal toolbox, turning it over in her hands like it weighed more than it should have. "My dad's," she said, before I could ask. "He used to let me hand him wrenches when I was 7 and pretend I was actually helping. I probably slowed him down by an hour every single time. Doesn't sound like slowing down to me." She looked at me for a second, surprised, like she hadn't expected that particular answer from a coworker she mostly knew through shared elevator rides. Then she set the toolbox carefully in the truck bed, tucked between 2 padded chairs, and went back to work without saying anything else. I didn't push. I was starting to understand that with Sarah, the door opened on its own timeline, and the fastest way to shut it again was to reach for it too soon. Carol filled most of the silence instead, and she filled it well. She asked what I did for the company, whether I liked the work, how long I'd lived in the area. Easy questions, the kind you ask to be friendly. Then, without changing her tone at all, she asked whether my parents were still local, whether I had brothers or sisters, whether I'd ever thought about buying a house instead of renting. I answered every single one before I noticed what she was actually doing, which was building a file. By the time we'd cleared half the unit, Carol Doyle knew more about my life plans than most of the people I'd worked beside for 3 years. It wasn't until we were loading the last dresser into the truck bed that she asked one that wasn't so easy. "Are you seeing anybody, Nathan?" I nearly dropped my end of the dresser. Sarah, from the other side of the truck, said her mother's name in a voice sharp enough to cut wire. "Mom." "It's a normal question," Carol said, entirely unbothered. "It's not a normal question to ask a man while he's holding furniture." I laughed, because what else do you do? "No, ma'am. Not seeing anybody." Carol nodded once, like she'd filed that answer away in a folder she planned to open later. I didn't think much of it at the time. People's mothers ask nosy questions. That's practically a job requirement. I figured it was just Carol being Carol, and we finished loading the truck, dropped everything at the new storage place Sarah had lined up, and I drove home thinking about lunch, not about anything else. I should have paid closer attention. Because Carol Doyle, it turned out, did not ask questions she didn't already have plans for. The plan revealed itself slowly, the way a fence line reveals itself in fog. You don't see the whole shape of it at first. You just keep bumping into pieces of it and eventually realize they're all connected. The first piece came 2 days later, when Sarah found me in the break room and said her mother wanted to have us both over for dinner as a thank you. "Just something simple," she said. "Nothing weird." I wanted on the record that both scripts I'd ever heard warning me about a phrase turned out to be right about this one, too. Nothing weird is the sentence people use right before something gets extremely weird. Carol's house sat on a quiet street with a wraparound porch and a garden that looked like it had opinions of its own. When I pulled up, there were exactly 3 cars in the driveway, which struck me as one more than a thank you dinner for 2 people generally requires. Sarah met me at the door with an expression I hadn't seen on her before. Somewhere between apologetic and furious. "Before you go in," she said, "Lo, I need you to know I did not sign off on this." "On what?" The door opened before she could answer, and Carol stood there in an apron, all warmth and hospitality, waving me inside like I was late for something I hadn't agreed to attend. Behind her, at the dining table, sat 2 more people. A man about Carol's age who introduced himself as her brother-in-law, and a woman in her late 20s who Carol introduced as her niece, Priya, visiting from out of state. I understood the entire architecture of the evening in about 4 seconds. Carol had built a dinner party with exactly 1 empty seat next to Priya, and exactly 1 guest who didn't know he was the featured attraction. Sarah looked like she wanted to walk into the kitchen and never come back out. "Mom," she said, "this is not what you told me it was." "It's dinner," Carol said. "Everyone's allowed to eat dinner. You told me it was a thank you for Nathan." "It is a thank you for Nathan." Carol set a dish down like that settled the matter completely. I also happened to think Priya would like him. Priya, to her credit, looked almost as uncomfortable as I felt. "I told her not to do this," she said quietly, which at least meant we were all standing on the same side of an awkward situation neither of us had built. I sat down because leaving felt ruder than staying, and honestly, some small stubborn part of me wanted to see how the evening was actually going to unfold. Dinner was good. Carol was a genuinely excellent cook, and conversation moved along fine once everyone quietly agreed to pretend the matchmaking hadn't been announced out loud 15 minutes earlier. Priya was smart, pleasant, easy to talk to. Under any other circumstances I might have actually enjoyed getting to know her. Carol's brother-in-law, a quiet man named Ed who mostly seemed grateful for a home-cooked meal, kept the small talk moving whenever it threatened to stall. He asked me about the shipping company, told a long story about a warehouse job he'd worked 30 years earlier, and generally acted like a man who had been dragged to enough of these dinners to know his job was to keep the temperature comfortable. I appreciated him for it. Every table needs somebody like that. Carol, meanwhile, ran the evening like a woman conducting an orchestra she'd already written the score for. She refilled my glass before I'd finished half of it. She mentioned, twice, unprompted, that Priya had just gotten a promotion at her firm, and mentioned, once, that I seemed like the kind of man who appreciated a woman with real ambition. Priya, to her credit, tried to steer the conversation sideways every time her aunt aimed it somewhere specific, but Carol had the tenacity of somebody who had clearly done this before and expected to win eventually through sheer persistence. But every time I looked up from my plate, I found myself watching Sarah instead. The way she rolled her eyes at her mother's comments. The way she jumped in to redirect a question before it could get uncomfortable. The way she looked, for one unguarded second, almost jealous of the seat her mother had assigned to somebody else, before she caught herself and put the look away. That was the moment the whole evening stopped being funny and started being complicated. After dinner, Carol all but shoved Priya and me toward the porch to talk while she and Sarah cleared the table, which felt less like hospitality and more like stagecraft. Priya sat down across from me and let out a long breath. For what it's worth, she said, I actually did tell her to stop doing this. Does she do it a lot? You have no idea. I got set up with a dentist last spring who spent the entire dinner talking about his boat. Priya smiled, but it was tired. She means well. She just doesn't know when to leave a thing alone. Any theories on why me? Priya looked at me for a second like the answer was obvious and she was surprised I hadn't gotten there yet. Honestly. I think you're a decoy. A decoy. I think, Priya said carefully, my aunt figured out something about Sarah before Sarah figured it out about herself. And I think this dinner was never actually about me. I didn't say anything for a second. Somewhere behind us, through the kitchen window, I could hear Sarah's voice, tight and low, arguing with her mother in the particular tone people only use with family. I couldn't make out the words. I didn't need to. I understood the shape of it well enough. We left Priya out of it after that night, at least officially. Carol never brought her up again, which in hindsight should have told me everything. She hadn't been building toward Priya at all. Priya had been the excuse to get me through the front door. Everything after that dinner was Carol working a much longer, much quieter plan, and I was too slow, at first, to see it for what it was. The next few weeks, Carol found reasons to call me directly instead of going through Sarah. A gutter that needed clearing before the fall rains. A shelf that wouldn't sit level no matter what she tried. A car battery that died in her driveway on a Tuesday morning when Sarah was already at work and couldn't get away. The gutter call came first, on a Wednesday evening, Carol's voice bright and apologetic in the way that told me the apology was mostly decorative. I hate to even ask, she said, but the leaves have gotten into the downspout, and I don't trust myself on a ladder anymore. I drove over that same evening, cleared 4 feet of soaked leaves out of a gutter that honestly hadn't been that bad, and stayed for a slice of pie afterward that I strongly suspected had been baked before she ever called me, which told me the gutter had never really been the point. The shelf came a week after that. It was, as Sarah later confirmed under oath, already level. I checked it twice with an actual level I'd brought from the truck, found nothing wrong with it, and still spent 45 minutes in Carol's kitchen removing it, reattaching it a 1/4 inch to the left, and putting it back exactly where it had started, because by that point I understood the shelf had never been about the shelf either. Every single time, Sarah found out after the fact and showed up furious, usually still in her work clothes, usually with the specific exhausted energy of someone who had left the office early because her mother had texted her a single alarming word with no context attached. She has your number now, Sarah said, standing in her mother's driveway while I closed the hood of Carol's car. Do you understand what that means? She is never going to stop. It's a car battery, Sarah. It's never just a car battery with her. Sarah crossed her arms and looked at the house like it had personally betrayed her. Last month it was a gutter. Before that it was a shelf that, and I want to be honest with you, was already level. I checked it myself. I laughed, and Sarah shot me a look that told me this was not, in her opinion, a laughing matter. I'm serious, Nathan. She's not subtle. She's never been subtle. When I was 17, she invited a boy from church over for tutoring I never asked for. I didn't need tutoring. I had a 4.0. So this is a pattern. This is a lifestyle. Sarah dropped her arms and let out a breath that had more exhaustion in it than anger now. I'm sorry you got pulled into it. You did one nice thing for us and now you're stuck getting recruited into her 5-year plan. I closed the hood the rest of the way and wiped my hands on a rag, buying myself a second before I answered, because the honest answer wasn't the one I expected to have ready. Maybe I don't mind being recruited, I said. Sarah went still. Not dramatically. Just a small pause, like she'd expected a joke and gotten something else instead. What does that mean? I could have walked it back right there. Made it a joke, the way I'd made everything else a joke since that first Saturday at the storage unit. Instead I found myself telling her the truth, plain, because I was tired of dancing around something that had been building since the moment I watched her stand in front of a box of her father's old tools and not say a word. It means your mother's terrible at being subtle, I said, but she's not wrong about what she's aiming at. She just aimed it at the wrong daughter's cousin first. Sarah's face did something complicated. Not quite a smile. Not quite anything I could read cleanly. Nathan. You don't have to say anything back, I said. I just wasn't going to keep pretending I only show up here for your mother's car battery. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Long enough that I started running through every way that sentence might have been the wrong one to say out loud. Then she looked toward the house, toward the kitchen window where I was fairly certain Carol was pretending not to watch us while doing dishes she'd already washed twice. She's going to be unbearable if this works, Sarah said quietly. Is that a yes? That's a warning. But she was smiling now, small and real, the kind of smile I hadn't seen from her in the office, in 6 months of coffee runs and cubicle small talk. You have no idea what you're agreeing to. I fixed her gutters. I think I have some idea. That should have been the beginning of something simple. It wasn't, not right away, because 2 days after that conversation in Carol's driveway, Sarah went quiet in a way I recognized from the storage unit, the same careful retreat behind a door she'd learned a long time ago how to shut without slamming it. She still said good morning at the office. She still brought her coffee from home. But the easy back and forth we'd built over 6 months had gone stiff, formal, like she was reading from a script she'd written specifically to keep both of us at arm's length. I gave it 3 days before I said anything, because I figured she needed room, and because pushing too early had cost me things before. On the 4th day, I found her in the break room alone, staring at a coffee she hadn't touched. You've been avoiding me, I said. I've been busy. Sarah. She set the coffee down and looked at me with an expression that had more fear in it than anything else I'd seen from her, more than the storage unit, more than Trevor's name coming up later. I'm good at this, she said. The distance. The keeping people 2 steps back so it doesn't hurt as much when they leave. I've had a lot of practice. Who left? Everybody eventually, she said, quieter now. My dad, technically, though that wasn't his fault. A couple of guys before you who liked the idea of me more than the actual work of knowing me. I got tired of being surprised by it, so I stopped letting people close enough to surprise me. I didn't rush to fix that sentence with something reassuring, because reassurance wasn't what she needed and we both knew it. I'm not asking you to promise me forever in a break room, I said. I'm asking you not to disappear on me because your mother got excited before either of us was ready to be excited. Sarah let out a breath that had a laugh buried somewhere inside it. That's a very specific thing to be scared of. It's been a very specific 2 months. She looked at me for a long moment, the kind of look that decides something before the person doing the looking has fully admitted it to themselves. Okay, she said finally. I'm not disappearing. I just need you to know that if I get quiet sometimes, it isn't about you. It's old wiring. I'm working on it. I can work with old wiring, I said. I fix things for a living, remember? Gutters, shelves, car batteries, apparently entire families. I think I can handle one stubborn coworker who gets quiet when she's scared. I'm not just quiet. I disappear. There's a difference. Then I'll notice when you disappear, I said, and I'll come find you. That's the whole plan. It's not complicated. Sarah looked at me for a second like she wasn't sure whether to argue with how simple I'd made it sound, and then decided, apparently, not to bother. That got the real laugh out of her, the one I'd been missing for 4 days, and something in my chest loosened that I hadn't realized had gone tight. It wasn't a fix. Not completely. But it was a door left open instead of shut, and with Sarah, I was learning, that counted for almost everything. We didn't make it official that afternoon, not with any big declaration, not with anything either of us would have called a speech. We just started eating lunch together again, the way we had before, except now neither of us pretended the conversation was only about work. Small steps. That was how Sarah moved through anything that mattered to her, and I'd already decided I wasn't in a hurry. That should have been the end of the complicated part. It wasn't, because Carol, once she got confirmation that her plan had worked, even if it hadn't worked in the order she originally intended, did not know how to celebrate quietly. Within a week, half her side of the family knew. Within 2 weeks, Priya had texted me a laughing emoji and the words called it with no further explanation needed. Within a month, Carol had started referring to me at church as Sarah's Nathan, which made Sarah want to disappear into the floor every single time she heard it. The real trouble started when Carol decided that since her plan had worked, she'd earned the right to plan everything that came after it, too. It began small. She wanted to host Thanksgiving, which was fine, except she wanted to host it as a way of introducing me to the rest of the extended family all at once, which was less fine. Then she started asking Sarah, with a casualness that fooled absolutely nobody, whether we'd talked about moving in together. Then, one Sunday afternoon, she asked me directly, in front of Sarah, whether I had thought about rings yet, like she was asking about the weather. Sarah nearly choked on her coffee. Mom. It's a normal question. You said that about the last one, too, and that one was about my future husband's employment history, which you asked him before you'd even confirmed he was interested in me. I had a good feeling, Carol said, entirely unbothered, the same way she'd been unbothered through every version of this conversation for 2 months straight. I watched Sarah's frustration build, the particular kind of frustration that only comes from loving somebody and being embarrassed by them in the same breath, and I understood something about the two of them I hadn't fully understood before. Carol wasn't overstepping because she didn't respect her daughter's boundaries. She was overstepping because she'd spent years watching Sarah build walls around every part of her life that mattered, and Carol had run out of patience waiting for an invitation through the front gate. That afternoon, after Carol finally let the ring comment go and disappeared into the kitchen to fuss over a pie nobody had asked for, I found Sarah out on the back steps, arms wrapped around her knees, looking more tired than annoyed now. You okay? She doesn't know how to want something from me without also trying to run the whole operation herself, Sarah said. She's been like this since my dad died. Like if she stops managing everyone's lives, something else is going to fall apart, too. I sat down beside her. Does it bother you? Actually bother you, not just embarrass you? Sarah thought about that longer than I expected. It used to. I spent a long time keeping people out of my life because I didn't want anyone else deciding things for me the way she does. You, work, everything. I kept it small on purpose. And now? She looked over at me, and there was something steady in her face that hadn't been there the day she'd asked me for a favor with a rented truck bed. Now I think maybe I let her get away with it because some small, annoying part of her was right. I wasn't going to ask you myself. I would have stayed exactly where I was for another year, being fine, being careful, being the person who doesn't need anything from anybody. So this is her fault. This is entirely her fault, Sarah said, and I am never telling her that, because she will never let either of us hear the end of it. I laughed, and for the first time since that dinner with Priya and the boat-obsessed dentist story, the whole thing actually felt funny instead of just complicated. Carol's meddling hadn't ruined anything. It had just dragged into daylight something Sarah and I had both been circling for months without either of us willing to say it first. The real test came a few weeks later, when Carol's plan collided with somebody else's, and I found out exactly how far she was willing to go to protect the outcome she'd already decided on. Sarah's ex-boyfriend, a guy named Trevor who I'd heard exactly one story about and hadn't liked based on that story alone, resurfaced out of nowhere with a text asking to catch up. Sarah, to her credit, ignored it. Trevor, less to his credit, did not take the hint, and showed up at Carol's house on a Sunday when he somehow knew both of us would be there. I watched Carol's whole posture change the second she recognized his car in the driveway. Whatever warmth she'd been running on all afternoon dropped out of her like a switch had been flipped. "He is not staying for dinner," Carol said, already moving toward the door before Sarah had even processed who had pulled up. Trevor came up the front walk with the kind of easy confidence that told me he'd never once considered the possibility that showing up uninvited might not go his way. "Sarah," he said, like they'd spoken yesterday instead of years ago. "You look good." "You need to leave," Sarah said. "I just wanted to talk." Carol stepped between them before I even had the chance to. "You had years to talk," she said. "You don't get to decide the timing is right just because it's convenient for you." Trevor's easy smile faltered for the first time. "Mrs. Doyle, I'm not trying to cause a problem." "You're standing in my driveway uninvited," Carol said. "You are already the problem." I stayed a step back, close enough that Sarah knew I was there, far enough that this wasn't mine to lead. Sarah didn't need rescuing. She'd made that clear to me more than once, and I'd learned enough by then to respect it. What she needed was for the people who loved her to back her instead of talking over her, and for once, Carol did exactly that instead of taking the moment for herself. "I don't want to talk to you, Trevor," Sarah said, steady now, the shake gone out of her voice. "Not because my mother's standing here. Because I don't have anything left to say to you." Trevor looked between the three of us, doing some quick math on a situation that clearly wasn't unfolding the way he'd pictured it on the drive over. "Fine," he said. "Wow. Okay." He looked at me last, sizing me up in that particular way men do when they're trying to figure out if they've lost something to somebody standing 3 feet away. "Guess I know where I stand." "You knew where you stood before you got here," Sarah said. "You just didn't like the answer, so you drove 2 hours to get a different one." He left without saying anything else, tires kicking up gravel the same overdramatic way people's exits always seem to in stories like this, and the driveway went quiet behind him. Carol let out a breath like she'd been holding it since she first spotted his car. "I could have handled that," Sarah said, "but there wasn't any real edge in it." "I know," Carol said. I still wasn't going to stand in my own kitchen and pretend I didn't see him pull up. Sarah looked at her mother for a long moment, something softening in her face that had nothing to do with Trevor at all. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're my daughter," Carol said, like that single fact explained everything else. "I don't always know when to stop meddling in the good parts. I'm always going to know when to step in for the bad ones." We stayed for dinner after all, the three of us, quieter than usual, the adrenaline of the driveway slowly draining out of the evening. Carol didn't bring up rings. She didn't bring up caterers or Priya or any of the usual material. She just set an extra plate for me without asking, the way she always did now, and let the conversation stay small. Later, while Sarah was in the kitchen wrapping leftovers, Carol found me on the porch alone and sat down in the chair beside mine without an invitation, which by then I'd learned was simply how Carol operated in every room she entered. "I know I pushed too hard," she said, not looking at me, looking out at the yard instead. "I've always pushed too hard." Her father used to tell me that constantly. "Carol, let the girl breathe. You clearly haven't stopped." "No," she said, and there was something almost sad in it. "After he passed, I think I got scared that if I stopped pushing, everything would just go still. Sarah would go still. I'd go still. So I keep pushing, even when I know I should sit back, because sitting back feels like giving something up I'm not ready to give up." I thought about that for a second, about a woman who'd built an entire dinner party around a niece she barely mentioned again, about gutters that didn't need clearing and shelves that were already level. "For what it's worth," I said, "the pushing worked. I wouldn't have said anything to Sarah for another year if you hadn't shoved us both through that door." Carol looked over at me, and for the first time since I'd met her, the confidence dropped for just a second, replaced by something more uncertain, more grateful than she seemed comfortable showing. "Don't tell her I said thank you," she said. "She'll never let me hear the end of it. Your secret's safe." "Good," Carol said, standing back up, composure fully restored, already moving toward the kitchen to fuss over leftovers nobody needed fussing over. Now, about the wedding caterers I mentioned earlier. Carol. I'm only saying I have a list. That was the moment I understood the whole shape of Carol Doyle, finally, all the way through. She hadn't orchestrated a dinner with Priya because she thought I'd be a good match for her niece. She'd done it because she'd watched her daughter build a life with the doors locked from the inside, and she didn't know any way to help except to force a window open and hope somebody climbed through it. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't always welcome. But underneath every overstepping question and unnecessary car battery emergency, it was exactly what it looked like. A mother who couldn't stand watching her daughter go it alone anymore. 6 months after that Saturday at the storage unit, Sarah and I moved into a place together, a small house not far from Carol's, close enough that Sunday dinners became a fixed point on the calendar instead of an ambush. Carol still asked questions she had no business asking. She still introduced me to new relatives as Sarah's Nathan like it was a job title. But she'd earned the right to some of that, I figured. Meddling badly still counts as trying, and Carol Doyle had never once stopped trying, not for one single day since her daughter decided the safest way to live was alone. Sarah changed, too, slowly, in ways that were easy to miss unless you'd known her before. She started leaving her office door open when she was on personal calls. She mentioned her father in ordinary conversation without the flinch that used to follow his name. She invited people from work over for dinner, actual dinner, not a coffee run in the break room, and watched the whole thing unfold without needing to control every minute of it. I noticed these things one at a time, the way you notice a fence finally holding steady after a hard season of storms, and every time I noticed one, I thought about the woman standing in a storage unit parking lot 4 hours into a Saturday, holding her father's toolbox like she wasn't sure whether she was allowed to keep it. Priya, for her part, ended up dating one of Ed's coworkers a year later, a decent guy named Marcus who Carol had absolutely nothing to do with setting up, a fact Carol mentioned with visible disappointment at every family gathering that followed. I had nothing to do with this one, she'd say, like it physically pained her to admit it. I want that on the record. Nobody's arguing with you, Mom, Sarah told her once, and Carol looked so genuinely wounded by the lack of credit that the whole table ended up laughing about it for a solid 5 minutes. A year after that, I proposed to Sarah on the same back steps where she'd told me her mother didn't know how to want something for her without running the whole operation herself. I didn't tell Carol beforehand, mostly because I wanted one thing in this relationship that hadn't started as her idea first. She found out anyway, of course, about 4 minutes after Sarah called her crying happy tears into the phone. And within the hour, Carol had already texted me a list of caterers. Sarah looked at the message over my shoulder and started laughing so hard she had to sit back down. I told you, she said. She is never going to stop. I know, I said. I think I stopped minding a while ago. We got married the following spring, in Carol's backyard, under a string of lights. Ed had spent an entire Saturday hanging while Carol supervised from a lawn chair and insisted, 3 separate times, that the lights were crooked when they were, by every measurement Ed and I both took, perfectly straight. Sarah wore her mother's earrings, the ones Carol had pulled out of a box during the storage unit clean-out all those months earlier without either of us noticing at the time. Sarah's father's toolbox sat on a table near the gift table, not as decoration exactly, more like a witness, the one piece of that whole complicated year that had started everything without anybody planning it. Carol cried through the entire ceremony, loudly, unapologetically, the way she did everything else. When somebody asked her afterward how she felt about the wedding, she said, without a trace of humility, I feel like I did an excellent job. Sarah, standing beside her, just shook her head and let her mother have the moment, because by then we both understood that some victories belonged to Carol whether she'd earned every inch of them or not. Because here's the truth I didn't understand the day I loaded a dresser into the back of my truck as a favor to a coworker I barely knew outside of shared coffee runs. Sometimes the person who changes your life isn't the one you were trying to help in the first place. Sometimes it's her mother, standing in a storage unit parking lot, asking a question you thought was rude at the time, already 3 steps ahead of both of you, already building a plan neither one of you had agreed to yet. I only wanted to help my coworker move some furniture out of a storage unit before it got auctioned off. Her mother had an entirely different plan the whole time, and honestly, looking back, I'm glad I never saw it coming. Have you ever had someone's parents see something in your life before you saw it yourself? And would you have gone along with a plan like Carol's, or would you have shut it down the second you realized what was happening? Tell me in the comments. If you liked this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.